Welcome to Sounding Freedom and Liberation, a podcast series looking at the power of music and sound to engage with ideas of freedom and liberation. I'm Ferdia Stone-Davis.
And I'm Sharissa Granger. Today we welcome our guest, Dr. Vanessa Paloma Elbaz. Dr. Elbaz is a senior research associate at the Peter House at the University of Cambridge and research associate on the ERC-funded project Ottoman Oralities and the Eastern Mediterranean, Sound, Media, and Power, 1789 to 1922. In 2012, she founded Hoya Jewish Morocco Sound Archive to collect, digitize, classify, and analyze contemporary and historical sound recordings of Moroccan Jews. She has more than 20 academic books, chapters, and journal articles on Jewish music in Morocco, Spain, and the Mediterranean. Dr. Elbaz's PhD from the Sorbonne's Center for Middle Eastern and Mediterranean Studies at Analco is entitled Jewish Women's Songs from Northern Morocco, Core Role and Function of a Forgotten Repertoire. She is currently editing a special edition on Judeo-Spanish songbooks as a technology of transmission for the journal Yard and a volume for the British Academy entitled Sonic Interventions in the Western Mediterranean, Music and Sound, Memory and Meaning. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So, with all of our guests, we've been having this kind of departure question where we ask, what does freedom mean to you, and how do you practice freedom on a daily basis?
I love this. Well, I think the issue with freedom is that we have been told what it is. And we've been told what it is not necessarily for things that serve us as individuals, but for things that serve kind of systems of the collective. And so, but it's interesting because in the last in the last few years, I've been thinking a lot about this, and about what is true. What is true freedom of self, right? Which, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily have the full answer, but the way that I've been living it is by really listening to my deep intuition and trusting that that what my sense is that I should do and want to do is the correct thing that is liberating of constrictions. So I think so much of our non-freedom is in our minds, right? And so to have a radical trust inside of our minds then can actually enact forms of freedom in the tangible, in the physical, in our own experience of how we can actually truly, deeply be ourselves. Because I think that that's when we feel that we have to perform or be something, then we're not free. But it's, I don't really have a clear-cut answer because it's a really complex one, and sometimes it's about allowing myself to be pushed kind of like to the limits of my own being, in ways that sometimes are wonderful and sometimes are uncomfortable, and then it's after that, it's with that then there's a sense of liberation. But it's not always comfortable. And I think that that's the thing that's interesting, is that freedom is not always comfortable. It's like we think it's some kind of like nice, open thing, but actually for it to really be this deep, deep liberation, there has to be a moment of friction.
Thank you. It involves an incredible undoing of everything that we have learned and of our very selves, isn't it, in that sense? But I like that you're pointing towards that dis-ease that accompanies it.
Yeah, I think that because we're socialized to feel comfort. Then on the other hand, of course, comfort is really important, right? We have to have moments of true calm and to not feel that pressure, right? But I think that I like the way that you talked about it, unwinding or undoing, to actually be able to undo these constrictions. Something has to give, and in that giving, there's a moment of tension, and I think that's, and I don't think that it has to be an aggressive tension or a violent tension but there is something about being able to face fears and to face feelings of inadequacy and feelings of injustice with another kind of attitude that then can allow for an incredible expansion, like a quantum expansion. And I think that's the thing that I really trust, that actually does, that our mind is so limiting, but actually if we can just allow that quantum idealism to set into ourselves, then actually we are unstoppable. And that's freedom.
Thank you. So we wonder if you can tell us a little bit about, of course, your research interests, how you got into your particular research interests, and also then how these intersect with ideas of freedom and liberation.
So I've been working for about 25 years on women's songs. And I started focusing mostly on Iberian women's music and on North African women's music, Sephardi music, the Sephardi in the Mediterranean diaspora. And it's been an interesting process because it's been about finding the communications between the oral and the written, actually finding that in this music that is mostly an oral tradition and that has been perceived to be a very secular and very kind of prescribed cultural folkloric music that didn't have any major historic importance or political or spiritual influence. Actually, at the core of it, there are some incredibly powerful messages that are being transmitted, and of a population that had a lot of social constrictions because of the way that gender has been dealt with in that society historically, and even until today in some groups. And so when you look at it at face value, it seems that actually most of the songs and the texts of the songs are kind of creating spaces of non-freedom for women, where they're actually told what to do, told what not to do, told what the negative consequences of bad behavior would give, and that these have to do with ways in which the social order would be disrupted. And if then women's behavior disrupts social order, then, they suffer from it. But at the same time, inside of that, there are very nuanced and quiet, but very intently directed messages of the ways that women's agency has pushed this narrative, and actually that they do things so that the social order and the patriarchal social order thinks that they're controlling their bodies, but actually they find a door or a window or a passageway to do things differently, and they change the texts, and they add humor, and there's actually a lot of double entendres and kind of playfulness around poking fun at those who believe that they're in power, or giving formulas to younger women of how to resist in ways that will actually be effective. So it's interesting to think of that in a way, because it doesn't seem that free to us. But I wonder if sometimes inside of systems with those kinds of constrictions, then the manners that people address or find, the pockets that they find to enact freedom, work in certain circumstances. I mean, but basically what's happened to this community is that most of it has emigrated. And I think that it's driven by the women, because the women want to have different kinds of freedoms that they don't have in more traditional societies. So that's another conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose when we're thinking about freedom, we need to be careful not to project what we think freedom is into context situations that aren't our own.
Yeah, so this is a huge issue, because there's the idea of what if it's a gendered material, right? What is a free woman, right? So is it a free woman who can make her own financial decisions, who can make her own political decisions, who can make her own decisions on her body, on her sexuality, on her creativity? And here they had a whole variety of decisions that they could make, and there were others that were more restricted. So it works for some people, and it doesn't work for others. And I think that it's also it might be individual. For some people, they actually like that kind of comfort of a very closed social system that allows them to have other kinds of freedoms that they don't necessarily need. I don't know.
And just in terms of changing text, poking fun, can you say a little bit about the performance contexts in which these songs would happen?
Yes, so we have a lot of songs that are done in the private sphere. So daily during work, during moments of gathering together. And I think it's interesting, because what happens is that a lot of this material becomes almost like, I call it like a soundtrack to life, where you have the song and you have the characters, because a lot of them are stories, right? So you have the characters, you have the narrative, you have this general story. And when something comes up that relates to it, it's like a proverb, then the melody will come in and the song, and people will just sing one line and make a reference. And since the people from the inside group know what you're talking about, then everybody already knows what the reference is referring to, and you can laugh, or you say, oh yes, and then you respond with something else, right? So there's that very kind of permeated daily performance. Then there are weekly type performances that have to do with the Sabbath. So on Shabbat, Friday night, and Saturday, around the table in the home, but also at the synagogue or at a community center. Sometimes there will be meals. Around meals, people sing very often. So before the meal, at a pause between one of the courses, people will do that. Sometimes also it'll be at life cycle events, so at a wedding or at a bar mitzvah or at a baby naming ceremony, even actually before, not so much anymore, but at funerals, there were special songs that were songs for death. And then there's songs that have to do with the lunar calendar. And these are cyclical, relating to agricultural cycles, but also these agricultural cycles are also related to song and time. And so the thing that for me is really interesting is to think about how the contexts have to do with cycles of time. And actually, I've changed the name of my monograph to include cycles of time in the title, because I think it became clear to me as I've been reworking the final details how key this is to what's happening. It's the way that sound, spaces, and bodies all intersect with each other, and in a way to create the infrastructure so that then forms of freedom can be expressed.
Lovely, thank you.
In terms of thinking about the archive, then, from your work, I really like how you are looking at, digital abundance, but it's also a critique of it being, disorganized, critiquing platforms that we usually take for granted as liberatory, right? And access for all, such as YouTube. Um, but also what you term, facing the disorganized digital repository. And, we're wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Hoya, um, the archive that you founded, as well as what does archive mean to you in the, within the discussion of freedom and liberation.
Thank you. Yes. I think that I'm glad that you brought up this idea of like the disorganized digital repository, because it's so true. It's like this has been incredibly liberating. Like everybody now can access all sorts of things that we didn't have access to before, if we can find them, right? So there's that issue. But also then we don't know what we're accessing. There's all sorts of, it's so mixed. So the idea behind Hoya was I'd been in Morocco as a senior Fulbright research scholar and recording people, doing oral history interviews, recording rehearsals, recording concerts, and recording services, religious services, pilgrimages, all sorts of different moments and snippets of like sounds on streets. And I thought, I have hundreds of hours that I can use, but I might not be able to use all of it. So, and why should this just be sitting on a hard disk or, that nobody ever has access to? Isn't this something about kind of care to our intellectual and cultural communities to share it? Because it's not. This, we were talking about this with Freddie on the way here. This idea of ownership of cultural material, and how archives for so long historically have been who owns the information, right? And the amazing thing, the liberating thing about the internet is that, most of the information out there is available, and this idea of hierarchical power over ownership of information is being broken down. And so in that breaking down of these oppressive hierarchies, I would say, of, who knows and who doesn't, who has access and who doesn't, we kind of have to have a little bit of a mess at first, I think, just so that there's this idea of the plethora of what's available. But then for it to truly be effective and usable and a little bit more streamlined, it actually does help us to have some sort of parameter that aids, that curates, that can gather materials in ways that we can then find everything in the same place. So for me, the idea of Hoya from the very beginning was, there have been researchers researching in North Africa for over 100 years and recording all sorts of materials, sound materials, but they're strewn all over the world in all sorts of different archives. Not all of them are available online. And many of them you don't even know to go looking for them until you find a reference in some footnote in a book that will then tell you to go looking to the National Library of X. And then you have to take the time. So I thought, okay, well, let's see if we could gather all this and just have all of this material available in one place. It's one repository, so that then things that exist in various archives can then be gathered into this one spot and searched in a more effective manner, so that the research that will come out will actually be better in the long run, hopefully. So there's this system called IIIF, which is this interoperability framework that it's originally for images, but recently, in the last 5 years or so, they've created it for sound. So it actually kind of scrapes the internet, or it gathers. You give it an address, and it can go and it can find all the materials that are already on different servers and bring them over to you. So this is something that I've been chasing after, because I this is what I want to do with the archive, that we're able to access things that already are online, and also have the things that I have, and then have other researchers deposit their materials as well into ours. So this whole relationality, I think it's about, and I've been recently reading Edouard Glissant, Poétique de Relation, this whole thing about relationality, and how actually it is in these relations. It's not about ownership. It's actually in relation that we are able to build knowledge and to build freedom.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it also goes, it helps us to think about how we might be able to, in all our, various fields and disciplines and our research, to kind of elude, the critique that you bring forward in your work on the kind of algorithmic driven reliance on, knowledge and the generation of knowledge, and how we approach knowledge. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. What have been, in that sense, also then the challenges of establishing and maintaining the archive?
I smile. Well, it hasn't been an easy road, because I started this before I had my PhD. So I started it as an independent researcher, that with a vision, basically, and without an institution backing me up, and just somebody that's very stubborn and hard-headed. And when I get an idea, I'm like, I really think this needs to happen. So it was, I was living in Morocco at the time, and I lived there until 2018. So I was able to gather all sorts of things. But in part, it was interesting because I was living in Morocco and living inside of the Jewish community, and so people knew me quite well. They knew my family, and so that gave them a sense of understanding what it was that I was envisioning and working on. And originally, actually, it was interesting because a lot of the people thought that what they had, that their cultural material wasn't important enough, and wasn't valuable enough, and that they really had nothing to give, and that they had nothing that was of enough value to warrant this interest. And that was, I think that a lot of people feel that around the world in cultures that haven't been kind of placed in the kind of cultural hierarchies of certain institutions. And so I kept on saying, well, even if you don't think it's important for my project, and, you're my friend. So please, can we just have this interview? And, but because of that, there are interviews that I never had. There are people that I was never able to record, and that passed away, and that knew things that I was never able to record. So that was one of the initial difficulties. And I think that more and more people started to understand. I started I perform also. So sometimes I would do a performance, and before the performance, I'd have a small video of some of the interviews with some material, like introductory words talking about the power and the poetry of what was this material. And people were so incredibly moved by that. And I remember this one concert that I did at the Institut Français in Casablanca, and there were these 3 older ladies there. And there was this text that I talked about how the Sephardi women in the Mediterranean were like sibyls that were singing to, the life cycle events of the community, and for life and for death and for birth. And after that, one of the ladies came up to me and said, "Vanessa, you turned us into something important." I was like, well, actually, it's you. But I think that part of this awareness, the process of then giving back to the community in real time, so that there's an awareness of the importance and the power of what they hold, is really key. And so there's that. Then on the other hand, then there were people that had, for example, handwritten songbooks and manuscripts that they shared with me. They were incredibly gracious and generous and shared with me. And there were others that I know had some that they never shared with me, and that they said that they had them, but then they didn't want to share with me because they thought maybe they could sell them or they could make some money from them. So there's this other situation that, people also have financial need, and they think, oh, you are maybe going to, I don't know, make a career off of this, and this is like the one manuscript that I have. And so there's that as well. So how do we make sure that the knowledge isn't lost when there's this situation where people feel a certain kind of ownership and fear about sharing it in open access? So, I think this is one of the things is that the idea behind all of this is that it be open access, except for maybe some materials that are sensitive politically or that would endanger people, right? That should be behind some kind of a firewall, but everything else should be available, because this is actually the way that we're going to know our histories and know ourselves and also know the other. And so this has this, I'd say, I mean, there are also some of the people that were in positions of communal power that then wanted me to work with them in the ways that they want, and they wanted me to do what they wanted done. And it's very difficult for me to do that kind of thing, so I didn't, and that was not met with joy. But that was a moment that was very liberating for me. So if we think about that, it's as intellectually liberating and also very liberating for other women in the community. It was very interesting, the example that I gave in the way that I've handled my research and my professional life. I know has really been inspirational for a lot of the women there, because they see it as steps taken with freedom in mind, and not just doing things because they were prescribed by people in power.
If I may just turn our attention to another aspect that comes through in your work then, which is of that digital archive as post-colonial. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about this. What does it open up for us in terms of our thinking and being?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that one of the things that's important also to understand is that the first recordings that we have of all this material were done primarily by people that were French and Spanish, and a lot of Spanish philologists, right, and French musicologists. So these were people that were coming from the colonial powers of the protectorate in Morocco. And many times they were actually military men or men from the church. So they also had an added kind of bureaucratic position, I'd say, which for a woman in a Jewish quarter would be a very kind of distant hierarchy, right? So there's a question about what was collected and which manners were they collected. And there's actually even been anonymization of the women, so we don't really know who they were, and we only have the songs kind of in a very extractive form. So they're not really talking about the context of the songs or what was important to them about the songs, but it's basically how did the songs relate to European culture. So this and so because of that, the forms of classification have very often been based on, or almost completely been based on, forms that were set in the beginning of the 20th century by Spanish musicologists, which really has very little to do with the way that it's functioning internally in the community. And so I have felt very strongly that it's important to recalibrate that, so that actually the ways that the people that have been maintaining this in these 500 years post-expulsion are using them today as a very local repertoire that's very connected to their local reality and their local life, and their local epistemologies, that we actually function inside of those local epistemologies and not with the superimposed Spanish philological ontology of the way that they think it needs to be organized. So this, I think, it's one of the main keys in the way that the archive actually will and has functioned to remember these histories of these intellectual histories, but also to understand where they came from. And I mean, we're grateful that they did these recordings because that means that we have them, but that doesn't mean that we have to follow the whole intellectual infrastructure around them. And so, because I think that also as we go into the coming years with all the, the new search engines and the information online, these other forms of epistemological organization have to be put into the systems so that then the true power of this knowledge can become apparent to people the world over. So, but this is a big job for all oral traditions, I think. We need many teams of people to do this.
I mean, I find this amazing, and partly it speaks to that the complexity of curating, I suppose, and what curating actually entails, and how one curates in a sensitive way that respects these local epistemologies. But then to think that of the ramifications of that it's not simply in this arena, this particular arena, that it will then have this more global effect is quite astounding.
I think it does, and I think that the more that we start thinking about that I think that we've gone through, in the 19th and 20th centuries, I think that we went through this period of, because of the technological developments, of understanding that there is something that unifies all humans in globality, right? And so because of that, there was a thrust to globalize, right? And to create standards that were maybe the same across different languages and cultures, and just to unify in a way. And that maybe was a necessary period in a certain kind of intellectual development, but I think that it also did a lot of intellectual violence to minority groups culturally, because of the flattening of distinctiveness. And I think that now is the time to start going back to these local distinctivenesses with gusto, because I think that also what will be happening with AI means that if we decide to flatten more, then we will almost become machines. and we are not. That's not the way we are. We're distinct humans with very different ways of being, doing, speaking, thinking, and I believe that we can do this in a way that will be a lot quicker than we think. I think it'll be very interesting to see how, once we start understanding how to create these systems of organizing and putting things, and to have the suppleness so that we can connect with large online systems while at the same time demonstrating distinctiveness, I think that then the machine will become a lot more organic.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think along those lines as well, Hoya intentionally foregrounds women's voices, home rituals, and oral histories often excluded from the official archives. So, what does this sonic emphasis on the intimate, the gendered, and the non-institutional teach us about freedom? kind of beyond these confines that you were just talking about, these kind of colonial confines, nationalist frames, nationalist projects, right? What can they actually teach us about, freedom?
Well, what I've found is that because because women are often operating in these more intimate spaces and using sound as a vehicle for communication in intimate spaces, that there's often a lot of freedom because there's not the listening ear of the other around. And so there's something that I'm not sure if I want to use this word, but it's the word that's coming that feels a little bit more raw. It's more real. It's a transcendence, and at the same time a deep grounding in the corporality of the self. And so this this form of like true embodied being through song and through sharing of song and story, and with children, for example, with babies, with each other, with oneself. It's this moment of, I mean, I'm very interested in the mumbled, the whispered, the internal, these things that we think are passing, fleeting, and unimportant, because I think that they're so powerful. There's so much there, and it's in the subconscious, but it's the way that we operate, and so to try to touch into those moments and to understand, well, what really is driving us. Can we even access it? And I think that's why I'm interested in this archive of the inner secret, in a way.
And in this space of intimacy, and I think this is where, so reading your work, this idea of rupture comes out very powerfully, I find, and has different layers, it seems to me. And we can talk about that now. I'd love to hear you tell us a little bit about that. But how that also engages with that, with the secrets, so it's even in those intimate spaces where these moments of rupture can occur, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, rupture, I think, can happen on the macro and the micro, right? So the macro rupture is, the expulsion and emigration, and I mean, Pan-Arabism was, for this community in the 1960s, that created kinds of rupture. But then there's the rupture of death, right? There's the rupture of birth, also, the rupture of marriage as well, and I'd say probably also the rupture of heartbreak. I mean, I think that I think it's interesting to think of these moments of in a way breakage, right? Because it's the transition between one form of selfhood and another, and humans are constantly evolving. We're all individuals, and as a group and as a collective, we're in movement. We never stop, and so we need these moments of shifts, which sometimes actually occur very very smoothly, seemingly smoothly, but there will be moments of forms of rupture. So I wonder what other kind of rupture in the intimate. I like that. I haven't really thought about the rupture in the intimate so much. I think about it more in the macro level. But I mean, there is that one example in one of my articles where I talk about this manuscript that is almost about to go to be put in the Geniza and to be buried, and then a rabbi comes up to it's in the 18th century. Rabbi comes up to the boy that's taking it and says, "What is this?" And he says, "Oh, it's a manuscript." And he says, "I'll buy it from you." And so he created this moment of rupture of the entropy that would have happened. And because of that, and now it's sitting in the Bodleian, and we have this manuscript, which is a 13th century manuscript from Spain, that would have been, disintegrated in the earth. So it's a form of intimate rupture, I'd guess, even though it was on the street, but it's between two people.
Well, even going back to your response to that first question about how one practices freedom on that daily basis, and there are resonances, it seems to me, in what you were saying there, of these moments of tension that in that intimate space, that those moments of breakage that actually, because one thinks of rupture as very, it can be very disruptive, destroying, destructive, etc. It can also be ameliorating, so it can move us beyond in a positive way. Although I wouldn't want to, I'm not saying everything can be smoothed out by any means, but in those kind of intimate moments, perhaps that's it seems anyway to connect with your first answer.
Yeah, I do think that sometimes rupture does provide a catalyst for the next chapter, which can be positive or maybe not. Hopefully it would be, but no matter what, it's definitely some kind of a rupture is probably needed when we have change. Something. It's not just smooth.
No.
I think also, rupture as a liberatory act in the way that you're, understanding it, as a break in listening, a break in historiography, a break in memory, and can also serve as a practice of liberation. So I'm just thinking about it in those terms as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a wonderful, from my notes here, a wonderful set, of the archive. It's a non-hegemonic archival repository of the intimate and the personal, of the voices of women and children, and of the non-official voices of Jewish presence in Morocco. So it's all about those who, going back to as well your process of collecting, those who feel that they are not important, that what they have to say, to offer, is not important, and what it does is you're shining a light on that, and thereby rupturing as well these kind of the hegemonies that are in place. So again, linking to the kind of that intimate space and what that can offer.
Yeah, I think that because we have such kind of scaffoldings of hierarchy that are so strong, very often we think that the people that will give the deepest insight are the ones that are at the quote unquote top, right? But actually, I remember one time early on in my field work, I was interviewing some people in the old folks' home in Tangier, and there was this one older lady who was of a very modest background. She had been a housekeeper. She didn't know how to read, and it was interesting because I asked her something about the spiritual meanings of cleaning for Passover. And she gave me an answer that was one of the most profound answers that I have heard yet in my life about this. And that when I say it to people that are very knowledgeable, they're shocked. She said, it's basically like taking the house and putting the whole house into a ritual bath so that purity, spiritual purity, imbues the whole house. So all the washing and I thought, it's alchemy. And I couldn't believe it. This lady that didn't know how to read was giving me this powerful insight that was of metaphysics, that, and the way that her voice spoke to me kind of went into my body in such a way that, I mean, I was in shock for the next 3 days. I had to just go back to my house and kind of sit there and meditate on what she had said. There was a real moment of rupture for me, in the understanding of where powerful knowledge comes from. And I think that there is so much like that in the world, that we just need to listen more.
I mean, also here what you've done, you've brought us in a very roundabout way. We've been alluding to sound, and obviously we've been talking about music, but I suppose what we're wondering is what sound brings. So partly, I mean, we have the sound of the voice, and there's one moment in one of your articles where you're talking about if we can't hear the dialects that are shaping the sounds, if we don't have that sounded word, then we lose an awful lot. We just have the abstract statement. So we've got that element of sound, but then also maybe you can speak to the music as well for us in relation to what we've been talking about, and also perhaps then how it, we have mentioned it in relation to freedom, but maybe you can draw that out more fully for us.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot, actually, with this current Ottoman project, about this idea of sound and voice and timbre, and I'm thinking back to Roland Barthes and the grain of the voice, and this also Feld and acoustomology and all these terms. So I've come up actually with a term that I have coined that relates to what all of this is about, which is sontinuity. So the idea that actually we use sound to create continuity, to create cultural continuity and transmission, and that it's actually not just, it's not necessarily the text, but that it's actually through the sound per se. It's the sonic itself and what is transmitted in that moment when the vibration comes, that actually it's a package of information that is that's full of all sorts of material, some that's frontal and some that's subconscious, that maybe even the speaker or the singer doesn't even know, but that they know, but they don't know in the frontal cortex. And I think that a lot of the songs actually are relating to this, because they're, as we were speaking about earlier, the fact that they're connected to specific moments in the calendar. So this cyclical time, this idea of being a body inside of this large system of spaces, time, and other people, and the way that we connect through these sonic punctuations, right? These moments of sonic punctuation, to in a way to liberate ourselves from perceived constrictions, to connect with others, to unify, because a lot of this is sung in community together. It's celebratory moments, so it's moments of kind of an openness to joy that then creates a feeling of liberation in the spirit, right? Because of this incredible joy, no matter what the difficulty is that one is going through at the time, that this joy should really permeate, and then at the same time, it's an establishment of self as a community, right? Because this song, this sounded environment is like an imprint of the community in a space where they're a minority, and so it's a statement of individuality. And when one is able to have a voice and to state one's own individuality fearlessly and openly, then one is truly free.
That's wonderful. And there's that. It's the moments that kind of that the slippages. That's probably not the right word, but between those the more collective, it's that. You've got a wonderful diagram that kind of shows how, in this experience here, it's taking in all of the surrounding, those different layers, those different collectives, those different narratives of which we're part. And yet there is a kind of unique moment in there.
Yes, I think that I always go back to this onion. It's like an onion or circles, concentric circles, because very often what the philologists did and what the colonial musicologists did is that they went only to the core repertoire, and they only looked for that core repertoire, the core local repertoire, and that became the quote unquote important repertoire. But actually, that's not the truth of the sonic world of this community. The community has the core repertoire, and then it also has a more general collective Jewish repertoire, and then it has a repertoire of the host countries that they live in, which can be, Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Lebanon, when they were there, Syria, wherever. So those repertoires, those popular repertoires, were important. And then there's the colonial repertoire, so the French, the Spanish, the Italian repertoires. Those are also part of the soundscapes and often used in the synagogue with contrafacta. So they'll take melodies from the outside, either, for example, a Moroccan Arabo-Andalusian melody is then brought into the synagogue for a moment, or a French melody of Edith Piaf is brought into the synagogue, or a Rolling Stones melody is brought into the synagogue. So, they all form part of the sonic engagement. And I think that it has to do with weaving together the different parts of the self, so as to not feel too split, because we're all composites, and even today I think every single human on this planet is a composite because of the way that communications have made us so connected. So we're, we have all this other richness. How do we then maintain our sense of self?
Thank you.
There's loads of questions that I want to still pose, but I'm aware. So I'll move to a question that might bring us all together. Given our conversation, what do you think sound and its uses might contribute to thinking about and conceptions of freedom and liberation?
Thank you for that question. I think that it's about expression. It's about finding forms of expression of self and of community. And that because sound and music are connected, I mean, this, we have even, Pythagoras and Aristotle were talking about versions of this, right? But also theoreticians have talked about the fact that when we sing, we use our voice, and our voice goes deeply into ourselves. And in Hebrew, the word for breath is neshima, and the word for soul is neshama. So it's actually the same. And in Arabic, it's the same as nafs, right? So this, I think this this idea of breathing into the core of self and then being able to vocalize, either as an individual from one's true voice, whatever that is, finding one's true voice, opening, liberating that voice, losing the fear of, saying and expressing, and being loud in spaces where one thinks that one needs to be quiet. And I think that that also there is a power in singing in the collective as well, and in creating sound and creating music in the collective, because it creates real camaraderie. It's healing. It's healing, and it's vibrationally healing, and it's emotionally healing, and it's intellectually very, very stimulating. So I think that that it's important. It's interesting. I'm just remembering. There's the chief rabbi of Morocco is a man called Rabbi Yosef Israel. He grew up in Tétouan in the 1950s in northern Morocco, from a family that's been there for generations, for 500 years. And his family has been chief rabbis, it's the dynasty of rabbis. And I've interviewed him on various occasions, and he said to me recently, in the synagogues, we used to sing the Psalms all the time, and it was seen with as much spiritual importance as studying the Talmud. And he said, but then something happened in the 60s and the 70s where they decided that studying the Talmud was more important. And so people started spending more time reading the text and not singing so much. And we don't sing the Psalms so much. We don't have people that are great scholars that sit to sing, only to sing, because they're busy studying. And he said, I think that's a mistake, because there's something very, very powerful about sitting and singing the Psalms. And then he said, that he, of course, was reminiscing to when he was a child, and that he would see all these great chachamim, these sages, sitting there and going through the book of Psalms, singing it as a form of deep spiritual practice. I think that we could do more of that. We could do more of sitting and singing in collective groups without it being necessarily towards a concert or prescribed because we have to, or something that's a very kind of clean-cut composition that has to be just so, but just this kind of very meditative, chanted kind of singing that is about being together in sound.
Thank you. I mean, it also, I'm just here, this kind of collective singing, this act of singing, what singing brings out. And then I'm also just thinking about you as a singer, and also it's all the way you've spoken, it's about finding voice. And I suppose I'm wondering about also how then in your own performance practice, the importance of giving voice also in your, because of the way it intertwines with your research. I don't know if you'd like to say anything about that.
Yeah, it was. It's interesting because when I studied at Indiana for my master's, and I had gone straight through from the time I was 3 until the time I was 25 without stopping through schooling. And I'd sung in children's choirs and, done all these vocal trainings and all these things. And then I started DMA, and my professor passed away in the middle of this. And then I thought, okay, you know what, stop. I'm going to go and do something else and be just be a singer. And so I moved to Los Angeles, and then I started finding my voice, and I started peeling. Like, I remember very consciously realizing I have to peel off all the layers of everything that I've been told to do and be, so that I can actually discover what my own voice is. And that was a really amazing insight, that, and I think we go through this for the rest of our lives, right? But I think that because my attitude towards my own voice and my own performance has been one that's related also to my own spiritual practice and my practice of singing from the deepest place in myself that I am able to access, that somehow that actually, when I perform, it reaches my audiences in a very different way. Because what I want is for them to be moved. I don't care if it's not pretty, or, it's not about sounding or being virtuosic, or it's how can I reach deeply so that this voice awakens some kind of a voice in them. And sometimes I've had people that have come up and said that they remembered something, or that it, did something very, very deep. I think that we can all do that. It's a journey. It's not, and it's also kind of outside of the box. Mm-hmm. But I think that because the gift of our voice and of our humanity is so profound, and that what we have to give to each other is so beautiful and so powerful, that when we're connecting from that we can really do amazing things.
Thank you. And that takes us back to this space of intimacy, I feel, like in that performance, awakening a voice, finding voice, awakening something in someone else. It's a very intimate thing, takes us back to that, and perhaps to moments of rupture as well.
Yeah, it does. It's taking people. It's not being afraid of really showing yourself truly vulnerable, mm-hmm. I think, and that then allows people to be vulnerable as well. And I think, isn't that what we all want to be able to do? Because then we feel safe, and then we can let go.
Yeah. Well, I think a theme of our conversation has been this kind of the tension that the dis-ease, it doesn't always go well, and that space of vulnerability is also a space of risk.
Yes. But in risk is where the most exciting things happen. It's actually, risk is exhilarating because you can fly.
Yeah. Potentially. I suppose it doesn't feel like that at the moment. At the moment, one is
No. It's incredibly scary.
Yeah.
It's incredibly scary. But I think that there's also, if one knows that everything's going to work out in the end, things will be okay.
Yeah, and that's a matter of trust.
Yeah.
And faith that things will work out.
I think, I mean, for me, a lot of it's a deep faith that I have this relationship that, I've let go, so you better hold me.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for our conversation today. I think it's been really helpful in terms of thinking about practices of freedom, I would say, and the locations of that, in that intimate space and how that intimate space can be disruptive. We've spoken about archiving and, the risk that comes with, the process of archiving, but also how that can in itself challenge narratives that are in place. The Hoya archive does sound incredibly valuable as a resource. And, I hope that, it continues to get the support that it needs to thrive. It sounds like it, in terms of the impact that it can then have, even beyond itself, beyond its own intrinsic value, is tremendous. So thank you very much, Vanessa.
Thank you so much to both of you for having me. It's been really a joy to discuss and probe and think and really be inspired. So yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you so much.